"You're blocking a heart transplant," the EMT yelled, banging the side of the ambulance as steam hissed off the hood. The siren was still blaring, the red lights flashing urgently in the quiet residential cul-de-sac. But the white Range Rover hadn't budged an inch. Its owner, standing beside it in pink wedge sandals and a giant sun hat, calmly sipped from her iced latte and said, "This is a fire lane, not an ambulance lane. It's HOA supervised, and I'm the president." The organ cooler inside the ambulance beeped twice. Low temperature warning. That beep would haunt everyone who heard it. Inside that foam-sealed box was a heart packed in melting ice, meant for a 9-year-old girl being prepped in the OR. Every second lost was a second closer to failure. And there she stood, Karen Danvers, the HOA president who had done this before. Only this time, it wasn't a drill, and it wasn't just property damage. It was life or death. That morning had begun like any other for Olivia's mother, Jessica, nervous, exhausted, and praying through every breath. She watched her daughter being wheeled away to prep for the transplant. The match had come through at 2:00 a.m. A tragedy for another family had become hope for hers. The transplant team had mobilized fast, coordinated across 3 counties to retrieve and deliver the organ. Jessica had been told that as long as the ambulance had a clear route and no major delays, the surgery would begin on time. She clutched Olivia's stuffed bunny so tightly it almost tore. No one could have predicted that the biggest obstacle wouldn't be traffic or time, but a woman who wanted to supervise landscaping on a Saturday morning. As the ambulance neared the gated community of Willow Heights, the driver's GPS warned about a blocked route near the access road. Still, they pushed through, taking the shortcut the fire department had cleared in advance. Only when they reached the tight bend beside the community clubhouse did they see it. A white SUV parked horizontally across the emergency fire lane, completely obstructing passage. No hazard lights, no cones. Just parked. And standing next to it was Karen, arms crossed, clipboard in hand, her sunglasses mirroring the frantic EMT jumping out. "Ma'am, move your vehicle now. This is a critical transport. An organ is inside, and we're minutes from losing viability." Karen lowered her clipboard slowly, pulled down her shades, and replied, "There's a landscaping crew arriving. I'm overseeing tree replacement. This lane's reserved for that work." The EMT tried again, this time louder. "It's an ambulance lane, the fire lane. The law says." Karen cut in, pointing to a laminated sheet. "Our HOA guidelines state no unauthorized vehicles on this lane. Yours is unauthorized." The organ monitor beeped again back in the ambulance. Another paramedic stared at the cooler, shaking his head. "She's killing this kid," he muttered. "Every second counts." The driver called dispatch, reporting the obstruction. "We're blocked by a civilian. Fire lane compromised. Organ integrity is at risk." The voice on the other end sounded tense. "ETA on fire support is 8 minutes. Do you have alternative access?" "Negative," the driver responded. "All other roads are gated. She's the blockade." At that moment, Sophia Chen was jogging nearby, home from med school for spring break. She'd gone out for a run and noticed the flashing lights. As she approached, her eyes widened when she recognized the ambulance company logo. Her cousin worked in the OR at the Children's Hospital. Then she saw the organ transport sticker on the rear window. Her heart dropped. She raced toward the ambulance. "Is this for the transplant case at County Pediatric?" She asked the paramedic, who nodded. "Girl, 9 years old. They called it an urgent red flag case." Sophia whipped out her phone and dialed her cousin. "The ambulance is stuck," she said quickly. "A lady is blocking the lane." "It's Karen?" "Yes, that Karen." Inside the hospital, Sophia's cousin relayed the message to the surgical team. Nurses scrambled to delay anesthesia. The chief surgeon cursed under his breath. "If we lose this heart, it's over. We have no second option." Back at Willow Heights, a delivery truck driver tried to reason with Karen. "Lady, just back up 10 feet. They'll be through in seconds." Karen turned and snapped, "You don't live here. Keep driving your cardboard boxes." The driver looked at the EMT. "You want me to move her car with my truck?" Before he could try, flashing red lights came around the corner. The fire chief had arrived in his personal vehicle, radio still clipped to his shirt. He stepped out, saw the ambulance blocked and the organ cooler inside, then looked at Karen with disbelief. "You again?" he asked grimly. Karen tried to smile. "Chief, I was just explaining to them. Move the damn vehicle or we'll tow it with you in it." Karen didn't move. The chief waved toward the EMTs. "Push over the sidewalk. Now." The ambulance jerked forward, climbing the curb and cracking part of the HOA-installed decorative walkway. It swerved around Karen's car, who screamed, "That's HOA property." The crowd booed her as the ambulance raced off. The driver radioed, "We're moving. 2 minutes to ER entrance." The fire chief turned to Karen. "You blocked an ambulance carrying a transplant organ. You could have killed a child." Karen raised her chin. "I have HOA immunity. I'm authorized to control emergency access for the safety of the community." "You're not authorized to obstruct federal medical transport," the chief replied, "and you're under arrest." As he read her rights, a resident caught the moment on camera. Karen flailed as she was cuffed, shrieking that her HOA lawyer would sue the entire department. The video would go viral by nightfall. But for now, time was still running against them. At the hospital, Jessica stood as the ambulance finally arrived. The organ was rushed in. The cooler was dangerously warm. The heart's window had nearly closed. The lead surgeon didn't speak. He just nodded, took the cooler, and disappeared into the operating room. All that remained was waiting and hoping. Outside the HOA gates, Karen was placed in the back of a squad car. Someone yelled, "You almost killed a kid." She scoffed and muttered, "If people need organs that badly, maybe they shouldn't live in such expensive neighborhoods." Another camera caught that too. The moment the ambulance cleared the community gates, the driver floored it like his own blood depended on it. Tires screeched as they sped down the avenue, sirens wailing at full volume. Inside, the paramedic clutched the organ cooler tighter as the low-temperature warning beeped again, this time with a red LED blinking faster. The precious heart inside had about 5 minutes left in its viable window. Any longer, and the tissue would deteriorate. The paramedic wiped the sweat from his brow and muttered under his breath, "Not for the first time that day. She could have killed this kid." At County Pediatric Hospital, the surgical team stood prepped in the sterile OR, the monitors already glowing, tools laid out like weapons before battle. Jessica, still gripping her daughter's stuffed bunny in the family waiting area, stared at the double doors with dry, burning eyes. No one had spoken to her in the last 6 minutes. She could only assume that the worst was happening. Every time a nurse passed by without stopping, she braced for the possibility that they would tell her it was too late. She tried to focus on breathing. One inhale, one exhale, but the sound of a ticking wall clock nearby made it impossible. Every tick felt like a second stolen from her daughter's life. In the OR, the transplant surgeon paced as his team monitored Olivia's vitals. The anesthesiologist had halted further sedation to avoid unnecessary stress on her small heart, but that meant the surgery window was narrowing. When the surgical nurse called out, "They're here," the tension broke like a glass pane under pressure. The doors flew open, and the paramedics burst through, one of them clutching the cooler like a quarterback charging for the end zone. The lead surgeon didn't even respond. He just took the cooler, opened it, and inspected the contents. "Temps borderline," he muttered. "We need to start now." The team sprang into action. A nurse ran to update Jessica while the surgeon checked the organ for any visible damage. The color was still good. The preservation solution had held, barely. In the gallery above the OR, a few medical interns who had been invited to observe watched silently, knowing they were witnessing a miracle balanced on a knife's edge. Meanwhile, back at Willow Heights, the situation had turned into a full-blown neighborhood spectacle. As Karen was shoved into the back of the squad car, residents began to gather with their phones out. Some were filming. Others were just shaking their heads in disbelief. A man in gym shorts shouted, "Third time this month, she's blocked emergency access." Last week, it was a fire truck. Someone else responded, "She had the fire lane repainted in beige because red was too aggressive." The murmurs turned to vocal outrage, and soon a small crowd was chanting, "Resign, resign." Among them, Sophia stood quietly, still on her phone with the hospital. Her hands trembled. Her cousin confirmed, "The organ made it in time. They're prepping for transplant now." "It was close," she said. "Too close." Sophia hung up and turned to the HOA board member who had just arrived. Her father, Marcus, he was fuming. Karen had manipulated the board, bullied her way into control, and made outrageous calls in the name of community integrity. This, though, was beyond anything they could have imagined. Inside the squad car, Karen was already yelling at the arresting officer. "This is all a misunderstanding. I have authority in that neighborhood. You people don't understand how HOA rules work." The officer didn't reply. He simply rolled up the divider window and focused on driving her to the precinct. The fire chief remained behind at the scene, giving statements to the media who had arrived within minutes of the story going live on local police scanners. One reporter asked, "Is it true she blocked a heart transplant ambulance?" The chief nodded grimly. "That ambulance was delayed by almost 12 minutes because of a single vehicle. We had to authorize sidewalk breach just to save a life." Another journalist asked, "Has this woman done this before?" The chief paused, then replied, "This isn't her first time obstructing emergency services. It's just the first time someone nearly died because of it." Across town at the hospital, the surgery was underway. Jessica was finally updated that the transplant had begun. She didn't cry. She couldn't, not yet. Her emotions had flatlined under the pressure. All she could do was sit in the hallway, gripping the bunny so hard her knuckles turned white, whispering Olivia's name over and over like a prayer. News of the incident spread fast. Within the hour, the video of Karen sipping her latte and refusing to move had gone viral. Someone had overlaid dramatic music and added subtitles that read, "Karen, defender of driveways, slayer of ambulances." Twitter exploded. TikTok edits flooded in. By midday, the hashtag #AmbulanceKaren was trending nationally. Karen's lawyer, summoned quickly after the arrest, arrived at the police station in a panic. He'd worked with her before, covering up HOA power struggles and small lawsuits from angry residents. But this was different. This wasn't a dispute over mailbox heights or hedges. This was criminal obstruction tied to a potential death. Worse, the evidence was undeniable. Video footage, eyewitnesses, 911 logs. Karen sat across the table, now in full meltdown mode. "They're making me the villain. I was just following regulations." Her lawyer tried to calm her, but she kept ranting. "They're trying to destroy me. That kid probably wouldn't have made it anyway. They always blame women in power." He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Back at Willow Heights, Sophia and her father began knocking on doors, gathering signatures for an emergency HOA assembly. Residents were already coming forward with horror stories. Karen had threatened a disabled veteran with fines over his wheelchair ramp, banned a resident from putting up Christmas lights, and once blocked a plumber during a sewage backup because he didn't have HOA-approved decals. This wasn't just a Karen problem. It was a systemic failure. As the sun dipped low, the hospital finally received news. The transplant had been successful. The heart had taken. Olivia was stable. Jessica fell to the floor, hands shaking, whispering, thank you," to no one in particular. The surgical team gave each other quiet, tired nods. They had done the impossible, but only just. The fire chief visited the hospital later that evening, bringing with him one of the EMTs who had driven the ambulance. Jessica hugged them both, unable to find words. Olivia remained sedated, but her vitals were strong. There was still a long recovery ahead, but she had a chance now. Karen, meanwhile, spent her night in a holding cell, curled on a bench, clutching her purse like it was armor. The reality was beginning to set in. No HOA bylaw could save her now. The public knew, the media knew, and soon the legal system would weigh in. As the lights dimmed in the precinct, she whispered to herself, "They won't take it all away. I built that neighborhood. I run it. I'm the reason it's clean and orderly." But outside that cell, the world had already decided. She had crossed a line no authority could protect her from. The neighborhood of Willow Heights had never seen this much chaos, and certainly not this much unity. By the next morning, nearly every resident had watched the video of Karen blocking the ambulance. It wasn't just the footage that set people off. It was the audacity in her voice, the smirk as the EMTs pleaded with her, and her complete lack of regret as the paramedics shouted about the heart inside. Social media had already branded her a villain, but inside the community, something more powerful was growing: resolve. For the first time in years, neighbors who had barely said hello were knocking on each other's doors, passing around a petition demanding an emergency HOA town hall. By lunchtime, over 120 signatures had been collected, enough to override any existing bylaw that protected Karen's position. The HOA board had no choice but to schedule an assembly that evening. What they didn't realize was how much evidence had been quietly collected over the past year. Sophia, still rattled but determined, stayed up all night compiling a timeline. Her laptop was filled with photos, screenshots, voicemails, and messages sent by residents over the past several months. People had complained privately for too long about Karen's unauthorized fines, her selective enforcement of HOA rules, and her misuse of power. But now, there was something far worse than ugly paint swatches or trash cans left out on Mondays. There was obstruction of emergency services. There was near-death negligence. And worst of all, there was pattern and intent. At 7:00 p.m., the clubhouse was packed. Folding chairs had been set up, but even standing room was tight. Reporters stood outside, cameras angled toward the glass windows. Inside, tension buzzed like an electrical current. At the front table, Karen's empty chair sat ominously next to her lawyer, who kept glancing at the door. When Karen did arrive minus 20 minutes late and wearing a long white coat and oversized sunglasses, the room fell completely silent. She walked in like a celebrity ducking paparazzi, but this wasn't a red carpet. This was a courtroom, and she was the defendant. She tried to speak first, but Sophia's father, Marcus, stood and cleared his throat. "We're going to follow order tonight. Public comments first, then evidence presentation, then a vote on emergency action." Karen opened her mouth to object, but her lawyer placed a firm hand on her wrist. She slumped back into her chair, arms crossed. One by one, residents came forward. A mother described how her toddler had gone into a seizure during a heat wave, and the ambulance had been delayed at the gate because Karen insisted on verifying the license plate against the HOA registry. An elderly man said Karen fined him for installing a ramp after his wife's stroke, citing unauthorized elevation changes. A teenager, voice shaking, talked about how Karen berated him for bringing home groceries in a borrowed car because it looked poor. The list went on. Each testimony was a blow. Each story chipped away at the fake authority Karen had wrapped herself in for years. Then Sophia stood, holding a folder nearly 2 inches thick. She placed it on the table, then pulled out the first sheet. This is an invoice for $12,000 labeled Aesthetic Emergency Boulder Polishing. The work was approved by Karen and completed by a company run by her nephew. According to county records, the company doesn't have a landscaping license. She placed the next paper down. This is a screenshot of an email Karen sent to a former board member, threatening fines if he continued to stir anti-HOA sentiment. He resigned a week later. She laid out more: photos of Karen painting over fire lane markings, altering community signage without permits, a letter from the fire department warning her about obstructed access routes, and an audio clip where Karen could be heard saying, "If people get sick, they should move somewhere less delicate." This is a Wellness First neighborhood, not a charity ward. Murmurs turned into gasps. Karen leaned forward, jaw clenched, her entire facade cracking like glass under pressure. Her lawyer whispered something, but she shook him off. Then a final surprise came. An anonymous resident had submitted a video from 2 months prior, showing Karen redirecting a delivery van away from a house with a visible handicap parking space. She told the driver, "Don't leave packages there. That family's already on thin ice with me." Her tone was smug, her laugh unmistakable. The vote was swift and unanimous. The residents motioned to immediately suspend Karen from all HOA duties pending legal proceedings, freeze all HOA expenditures she had authorized in the past 3 months, and form a temporary oversight committee to audit financial records. Karen's lawyer objected but was overruled. Sophia's father was appointed interim president until a proper election could be held. Karen was formally stripped of authority in front of everyone. She stood, visibly shaking. "You people are ungrateful. I made this place beautiful. I gave it structure. Without me, it'll collapse into trash and chaos." A man near the back called out, "We'll take the chaos over a dictator." The room erupted in applause. Karen stormed out, knocking over a chair. Cameras outside flashed as she shoved past reporters. "No comment. This is a smear campaign. You'll all regret this." But the only thing waiting for her was the deputy with a court summons. Civil charges had been filed by the hospital and Olivia's family. The deputy handed her the envelope without a word. Later that night, Sophia sat with her father, both exhausted but quietly satisfied. He poured them both a glass of lemonade. "You did something incredible," he said. "You didn't just stop her. You changed this place." Sophia nodded, staring out the window. "I just hope Olivia's okay. That's the only part I care about." And somewhere in a quiet hospital room, Olivia's heart beat steadily in her chest. A new rhythm for a new chance at life, because a neighborhood finally found its voice in someone brave enough to use it. Karen sat stiffly on the cold metal bench inside the processing room of the county jail, her white designer coat now folded in a plastic bag marked with her booking number. Her hair was no longer perfectly curled. Her makeup had smudged during the intake process. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, humming with the same annoying persistence as the questions that now looped in her mind. How had it all crumbled so fast? She had run Willow Heights like a well-oiled machine for nearly 3 years. Her rules, her vision, her authority, respected and feared. Now she was just another inmate waiting to be arraigned, and the very people she once fined for parking violations were probably home celebrating. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Karen, still wearing her entitled composure like a mask, sat beside her visibly exhausted attorney. The judge, a stern woman with steel-gray hair and a reputation for no-nonsense sentencing, glanced over the charges with a furrowed brow. Obstruction of emergency services, reckless endangerment, civil suit pending from the hospital, and another potential case being prepared by Olivia's family. Then she paused and looked over her reading glasses directly at Karen. "Is this the same Karen Danvers who last year attempted to find my mother for her gnome collection?" Karen's face twitched. She nodded slowly, unsure of whether to speak. "I thought so," the judge said, then leaned forward. "You're lucky the heart made it in time. If not, we wouldn't be talking about obstruction. We'd be discussing negligent homicide." The courtroom went silent. Karen's lawyer mumbled something about seeking a plea. The judge denied bail, citing the viral video and her clear disregard for authority and public safety. She was remanded into custody pending trial. As she was led out, she turned to the courtroom crowd and hissed, "You're all sheep." Across town, in a quiet, sunlit hospital room, Olivia lay recovering. Her tiny chest rose and fell with each beep of the monitors. Her mother sat beside her, stroking her hair gently. A few stuffed animals had begun to pile up on the windowsill, from friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had followed her story online. When the EMTs who had delivered the heart arrived to check in, Jessica stood and embraced them without a word. One of them, the same man who had shouted at Karen to move, looked at Olivia and smiled through misty eyes. "She's stronger than all of us," he said softly. Later that afternoon, a local reporter visited the hospital to interview Jessica. The segment ran that night on every local station, showing Olivia smiling weakly while holding up a sign that said, "Thank you for my heart." Her voice was quiet but clear when she said, "Tell the helpers I'm going to be okay." The video went viral. Donations flooded in to support pediatric transplants, and messages of support were sent from across the country. Meanwhile, Willow Heights was undergoing the biggest transformation it had ever seen. With Karen stripped of her powers, the new interim HOA committee wasted no time enacting sweeping reforms. The fire lane was repainted in bold red with reflective signage installed at both ends. A large sign was mounted near the clubhouse that read, "Emergency access. Do not block. Zero tolerance. The community bylaws were revised to prohibit any obstruction of public safety routes under any circumstances. Security cameras were installed to ensure compliance, and residents now had direct access to emergency numbers through a dedicated app that Sophia herself helped develop. One of the most significant changes was the institution of what they humorously dubbed the Karen Clause, a specific bylaw stating that any individual found impeding emergency services in any capacity would be banned from serving on the HOA board for life and fined the maximum allowable amount. The clause passed unanimously. Sophia's father worked closely with the new board to audit every HOA expenditure from the last 2 years. What they uncovered was astonishing. Karen had funneled nearly $60,000 in inflated invoices to her relatives' unlicensed companies, from boulder polishing to shade inspection fees. The spending was outrageous and unjustified. Several residents joined in filing a civil suit to recover the funds, and law enforcement confirmed an ongoing investigation into potential HOA embezzlement. Karen's house, once the grandest in Willow Heights, was now the subject of whispers and drone footage posted by curious YouTubers. In jail, Karen's reality continued to unravel. Her cellmate, a no-nonsense woman named Marcia who had done time for tax fraud, wasn't interested in HOA politics. She laughed openly when Karen complained about the sheets being institution grade and how the orange jumpsuit clashed with her complexion. When Karen tried to give a long monologue about her importance in community structure, Marcia simply raised an eyebrow and said, "Lady, you're in here for nearly killing a kid. Save it for the mirror." Karen requested special treatment multiple times, asking to speak with the warden, requesting almond milk, asking for access to her emails. Every time she was denied, she grew more indignant. One afternoon, a guard found her scribbling notes on the back of a cafeteria napkin, muttering about how she would write a book called The HOA Queen, How I Was Betrayed by the People I Saved. The guard snorted, snatched the napkin, and tossed it in the trash. Back at Willow Heights, a mural was painted on the newly renamed Ambulance Alley. It showed a red heart with wings flying over a neighborhood skyline, with the words "Every second counts" painted in flowing letters beneath it. The mural became a symbol of unity. Residents took photos there with their families. Olivia's photo was added in a small frame beneath the painting, with a simple caption, "She survived because we finally stood up." Sophia was invited to speak at a local community safety panel, and her speech was later published in a neighborhood magazine. She didn't gloat. She simply said, "Sometimes we don't realize how much power we give to people until it's almost too late. That day, it nearly cost a child her life. We can't undo the past, but we can change how we move forward." Karen, now just inmate number 44,827B, stared at a small TV in the jail rec room the day that clip aired. The other inmates were too busy playing cards or chatting to notice the irony, but Karen did. She watched as Sophia spoke, as Olivia's photo appeared on screen, and as the mural was shown again. Her jaw tightened. The guard turned the volume up just in time for the host to announce, in a rare moment of unity, Willow Heights showed that communities can learn and grow after tragedy. Karen turned away from the screen, furious and powerless. Her empire had crumbled, her authority revoked, her name mocked across the internet, and no matter how loudly she screamed inside her mind that she was right, that she was trying to keep order, that the HOA needed her, it didn't matter anymore. Because while she was locked inside a cell, the world outside had moved on without her, and it was better for it. Sunlight streamed through the wide glass windows of the Willow Heights Community Center, casting soft golden rays across the lawn where folding tables were arranged, and a large white tent fluttered gently in the breeze. Balloons bobbed in clusters. Children ran around laughing, their footsteps kicking up small clouds of dust on the concrete path, freshly painted with thick red lines marking the emergency fire lane. At the center of it all stood Olivia, a small, fragile figure with a bandage still taped to her chest, holding a cardboard honorary fire chief badge and beaming like she just won the world's biggest prize. Her recovery had been steady, slower than some had hoped but remarkable given what she had survived, and today She had been invited to the community barbecue as the guest of honor. Everyone had come, not out of obligation but with genuine warmth. There was a different energy in the air now, one that hadn't existed before. Willow Heights wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It felt like a family. Jessica stood beside Olivia, her eyes misty but proud. A nurse from the hospital held a small cake shaped like an ambulance, and the crowd burst into applause when the fire chief presented Olivia with a plastic firefighter helmet. She grinned and lifted it onto her head as the crowd laughed and cheered. Sophia stood nearby, quietly watching it all unfold. She didn't need to be at the center of it. Her satisfaction came from seeing Olivia alive, seeing neighbors finally smiling at each other, and hearing the laughter that had replaced fear and tension. Marcus placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder and nodded toward the crowd. "This," he said softly, "is the community we always wanted." The transformation hadn't been instant. In the days following Karen's removal and arrest, there had been confusion, paperwork, and tense board meetings. But each day brought more clarity. Residents shared ideas instead of complaints. The new HOA board, now made up of people from every corner of the neighborhood, implemented transparency in all decisions. Monthly budgets were posted online. Meetings were live-streamed. Emergency response drills were practiced quarterly, with local EMTs leading the sessions. And perhaps most symbolic of all, the fire lane that Karen had once painted over was now a symbol of resilience. They'd renamed it Ambulance Alley after a community vote. Sophia had suggested commissioning a mural, and the board agreed. Over the course of a week, residents young and old came out to help paint it. The final design showed a glowing heart hovering above a winding road, carried by angelic hands, with a faint silhouette of a child standing in the distance. At the base of the mural was a brass plaque that read, "Dedicated to all who make way for life." Olivia's handprint was pressed in paint beside it, smaller than anyone else's. But the story wasn't finished. Karen's trial began 2 weeks after the mural was unveiled. Cameras lined the courthouse steps as she was escorted in, now thinner, paler, and without the sunglasses and bravado she once flaunted. Her legal team attempted to argue that she had misunderstood the emergency protocol and had been unfairly targeted by internet mobs. They even presented her years of service as HOA president, listing every improvement she had made. But the evidence was overwhelming. Video footage, sworn statements, hospital documentation, and her own recorded words. The prosecution played the moment she shouted, "My landscaping permits are more important than someone's medical drama," and the courtroom fell silent. Olivia's mother testified, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. She described what it felt like to sit helplessly in a waiting room, knowing that a stranger's ego might cost her daughter her only chance to live. The surgeon testified too, explaining the minutes lost, the risk it posed, and the precision required to make that transplant work in such a narrow window. The jury didn't deliberate for long. Karen was found guilty of obstruction and endangerment. The judge, the same one who remembered the known incident, delivered the sentence with firm clarity. Karen would serve 2 years in a county facility, followed by community service at the very hospital she had once nearly ruined. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Her service would include custodial work, sanitation support, and helping with post-op recovery rooms. Her lawyer objected to the nature of the service, calling it humiliating. The judge responded, "Good. Humility seems to be exactly what she's been missing." Back at Willow Heights, the news was met with quiet satisfaction. There was no celebration for her downfall, only relief it was over. Justice had been served not through revenge, but through responsibility. Sophia was offered a spot on the new permanent board, but she declined. "I've got med school to finish," she said with a grin. "But I'll be watching you guys." Jessica returned home with Olivia the week after the trial ended. The front yard was filled with little paper hearts, decorations made by other neighborhood children welcoming her back. Someone had even left sidewalk chalk messages near their driveway. "Welcome home, Heart Hero," and "We love you, Olivia." The little girl sat on the porch, sunlight warming her legs, and drew quietly while her mom unpacked groceries. She looked up when the fire chief dropped by for a surprise visit, carrying a small wrapped box. Inside was a model fire truck with her name etched on it. She hugged him without saying a word. Weeks passed, and Karen's orange jumpsuit became a regular sight at the hospital. She walked the halls with a mop, head lowered, trying to avoid eye contact. Some nurses ignored her, others gave her disapproving glances. One day, while wiping down a windowsill, she saw Olivia walking down the corridor, holding Jessica's hand. They passed by slowly. Olivia paused and looked at her, tilting her head curiously. Then she waved. Karen stared, unsure what to do. She hesitated, half lifted her hand, then stepped on her own mop bucket and slipped hard onto the floor. A loud thud echoed down the hallway as her pride hit the tiles harder than her body ever could. Laughter rang out from behind a nurse's station. No one rushed to help. She wasn't invisible, but she wasn't important anymore. Outside, as the wind blew softly through the trees and the paint on the mural dried under the fading sun, the heart of a neighborhood beat stronger than ever, not because they had removed a tyrant, but because they had remembered what mattered most. Emergency lanes stayed clear. Neighbors looked out for each other, and whenever someone passed by Ambulance Alley, they walked a little slower, reading the plaque, remembering the day everything changed because one little girl got a second chance.